Good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, thank you very much for staying with us for the second session after the lunch. We are coming to the next very, very interesting topic. I think following the opening remarks from Pak Cecep about Indonesia's serious initiatives on creative economy, we are going to discuss on a panel, but prior to the panel, we will have presenters sharing their experience on the valuations and financing of the intellectual property. This is a relatively new area in Indonesia, and it has been admitted that this has been not a mainstream area of valuation as well as financing. So we have a lot to learn. We have a series of distinguished speakers, and we will have an exciting panel after this. I think for the first one, I would like to invite my colleague, Michael Kos. Michael is the IP financing and expert. He's coming from the World Intellectual Property Organization as an expert in finance and valuation of intellectual property. Yeah, without further ado, I think the floor is yours, Michael.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished participants, first of all, it's a great privilege to stand here before you today and to kick off this second plenary session on IP and its use for financing. My name is Michael Kos. I'm IP Finance and Valuation Specialist at the World Intellectual Property Organization. And in my contribution today, I will start with a brief introduction and a few statistics on the importance of intangibles and their emergence. I will then speak about WIPO's observations on recent trends on IP finance. And I will conclude with some key takeaways from our country perspectives reports. So let's dive right into the subject. Why should we think about IP and intangible assets for financing purposes in the first place? And let me answer that with three sets of key statistics. First, today's value of intangible assets worldwide accounts for about $80 trillion US, up about 30% on a year-on-year basis. Sorry. Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, apologies for that. The second key statistics I would like to present to you is that the total investment in intangibles has increased more than tenfold over the last 25 years. And that's more than 3 times its tangible counterpart. The third statistic is that intangible assets nowadays account for up to 90% of the assets represented in major stock market indices. So what we can conclude from that is that nowadays IP and IP-related intangible assets are not only the most valuable asset class in modern business models, but also gaining importance as we move towards an intangible economy. Now let us continue by looking a little deeper into the third statistics I provided. How the significance of intangibles has increased over time. In the 1970s, you see that tangible assets represented about 80% of the assets represented in major stock market indices. Giants of that era, like ExxonMobil, General Electric, Procter & Gamble, were heavy with physical quantifiable assets that lend themselves to common valuation approaches and standards. But today, the landscape has shifted dramatically. While tangible assets remain important, it's clear the balance has tipped in the opposite direction. and intangible assets are now worth more than the world's top 5 economies combined. And one of the most important aspects of this shift is that it's not confined to any one part of the world. Indonesia, in particular, has following this trend, and we are seeing very positive dynamics. On this slide, I'm sharing with you some highlights from WIPO's Global Innovation Index, which is a series of indicators that are being taken by the economists from WIPO's Economics and Data Analytics Department to benchmark innovation capacity in different countries worldwide. And we see here that, for example, the value of the top 5,000 brands in Indonesia has topped the value of 44 billion US dollar, which is up more than 30% from 5 years ago. And that you can take as a proxy for a similar development in other forms of intangibles. Indonesia's rise in the rankings of the Global Innovation Index has been remarkable. It has moved up 31 places from 2020 onwards and now occupies the 54th place worldwide and the 8th place in upper middle income countries. So what has enabled this shift in towards an intangible economy? One particular important contributor is the access to capital. And what we can see here in Indonesia is that, in particular, access to equity capital for startups and scale-ups has been a very significant driver of innovation. And it has been assessed to rank 7th place worldwide. Now, the story becomes a little different when you look at bank financing. And here, when we look at the 63 million small and medium-sized enterprises in Indonesia, we see that despite their incredible importance for society and economy, access to bank financing is a major roadblock for these entities, with more than 70% of them lacking access to credit and bank loans only accounting for 6% of their funding sources. So what role can IP finance play? Many of these companies are actually constrained in accessing capital by their lack of physical assets that are traditionally used as collateral by many financial institutions. And here, if they are innovation rich but asset light, they can definitely access financing by using these assets. So in the following section, I would like to share with you some takeaways and some trends we observed on the ground when it comes to how intangible assets and IP are used for financing purposes. Maybe just one entry point, we've heard it before, in many parts of the world, the use of IP and related intangibles for financing purposes is still in its infancy, but there are definitely silver linings. And what I'm going to show to you in the following is that in some countries, these forms of financing have already taken a significant importance. So 2 national examples that are very prominent. The first one is China. When we look at IP-pledged loan volumes, and that number is from 2023, by the way, it has topped 850 billion yuan, which is the rough equivalent of 170 billion US dollars. That figure was up more than 70% on a year-on-year basis. And what we see in 2024 is that the volume has already broken the 1.2 trillion yuan mark. So again, it is a very sustained increase in financing. We see similar patterns, although at a smaller scale, in Korea, where the aggregate volume of patent and trademark pledged lending has exceeded 10 trillion yuan, Korean won, which is the rough equivalent of 7 billion US dollars. And it's fair to say that these numbers speak for themselves. But what we cannot disregard is that there are other countries that are implementing significant strategic initiatives to facilitate IP financing on the one hand, and also the recognition of intangible assets in financial context. But before we look deeper into different countries' responses, let's take a quick look at how IP finance has worked in the private sector. And I'm not going too much into the details here, given that I was told I should mind the time. But what's very interesting is that, in particular on the banking side, which you see depicted on in the middle and on the left-hand side, is there is a trend towards IP being used for comfort, which is what you see in the case of HSBC, as well as IP-backed lending in a narrow sense. By NatWest Group, for example, in the UK. And it's clear that there are products being innovated by the financial sector that cater specifically to the needs of intangible, intense, and innovative SMEs. What you see on the right-hand side is a very interesting development. We see that the case of loan defaults and how value could be recuperated in that situation is really an important question for many stakeholders and financial institutions. And here, what we've seen is that insurers have already started to develop products to de-risk the financial product. What we can also say is that IP finance has definitely gained momentum. There is significant interest into the solution, both from the innovation ecosystem, but also the business community and policy making. And here it is really the case that a central perspective is the one of the financial sector, how the potential of IP rights and their monetization is being perceived. And it's really very reassuring from our perspective to see that the discussion on these important topics in many parts of the world is picking up pace. So what I would like to share with you in this section is preliminary findings from what we have gathered so far in our country reports project. So as part of WIPO's action plan, we are very much focused on closing the information gap and providing quantifiable insights into best practices and what's taking place in different parts of the world. And to do that, we have launched a country reports project that dives into different country experiences on what they are doing to enable or facilitating IP finance. And we currently have more than 20 countries taking part in that project in what you could describe as an international stock-taking exercise. 8 reports have been published so far, and you can follow the URL or scan the QR code on the left-hand side of this slide to access them. What our findings show at this point is that while many countries are currently working on facilitating IP finance, the way they are doing it shows significant differences in approaches. And here you can see these approaches grouped into 4 main categories that are particularly prominent in terms of measures. National responses take really a range of instruments, which could go from either direct subsidies and guarantee schemes to debt and equity offerings by, for example, government-backed institutions, to the other extreme of awareness raising and capacity building initiatives. And what's interesting is that these initiatives are happening very often with the involvement of the private sector. Specifically of interest are 2 areas shown in the middle of this slide, which are geared towards IP valuation and collateral recovery in the case of default. And to explain the reasoning for these initiatives, let's talk about the challenges to IP finance and how they are being addressed. To make IP finance mainstream, we need one thing above all, and that's trust and confidence, as we've heard earlier today. A particular issue when it comes to IP finance and the evaluation of IP rights is that these rights are complex. Deals take time and effort, and that increases costs relative to deal value and leads to the discouragement of some market participants. The second issue is that evaluation is difficult. IP rights are not straightforward, and their valuation is very different from physical assets if you compare it. They are very often innovative, so there are no clear benchmarks. They are context dependent, and this often makes valuation inconsistent and difficult for lenders to trust. A third issue is familiarity. So even when lenders understand in principle the strategic value of IP, they often lack the tools to translate that into financials and really get comfortable in these assets to facilitate financing. And of course, there's very little experience in doing that. Last but not least, monetization and risk. So the big question for lenders is, what happens if the borrower defaults? Lenders need to get comfortable about extending IP-backed loans. The bottom line is that all of these measures are ultimately geared at one thing: to enhance trust and confidence in IP as an asset class. And when lenders and financiers trust IP as a reliable asset class, that will greatly facilitate the mainstreaming of IP finance. So on this slide, I actually intended to go a little deeper into what countries have done to bundle these singular measures into comprehensive programs to facilitate IP financing. And I think one key takeaway is that they are combined into mutually reinforcing program initiatives. So no country really pursues the mainstreaming of IP finance with tackling one issue alone. It's very often several issues tackled at the same place. Perhaps here, given the lineup of speakers that is truly impressive after me, I would like to try the following. Instead of telling you about what we have found out, I'm going to introduce to you the different speakers in this panel and how their experience ties to what's shown on this slide. So as next in line, you have very experienced speakers in the fields of IP finance and IP valuation with Dr. Andre Gorius and Mr. Vidya Gopal. You then have Dr. Andrianzia from DGIP, who can provide a very thorough description of the IP finance landscape in Indonesia and the IP ecosystem. And what you have later on is a set of 3 speakers from China, Korea, and Singapore, Mr. Ma Ximing, Mr. Ha Sung Tae, and Mr. Andre To, that can really provide an account from on the ground of what has been done in their respective countries to facilitate IP finance.
Time is up. Sorry, Mike. Our time is...
Yeah, okay.
Sure,
it's already the last slide. So that already brings me to the conclusion of my contribution. And here is really one thing that I would like to highlight, because we're very often asked, okay, what is the ideal solution for different countries? So one thing I can share, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Countries are very different. They are shaped by different legal and financial frameworks, market maturity, and institutional capacity. While there is no clear solution, there are definitely key elements from successful country experiences that can be transported into local conditions. And here I would really like to conclude. I think what we are doing here and what's really important, and that's also very much in the spirit of this event, is to bring together different stakeholders in the ecosystem, like policymakers, financial institutions, of course, the valuation profession, and innovators to help countries overcome their discomfort and familiarize them with IP finance. So with that, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Michael Kos from World Intellectual Property Organization shared with us the global IP angle, how IP offers major potentials for Indonesian intangible economy, and with our 63 million SMEs. Also experience from Asian and Western countries have been quite encouraging. And the conclusion is there is no one size fits all. And a couple of key success factors from other countries will also be useful. Our next speaker would be Andre Gorius from Licensing Executive Society International. Yeah, Dr. Andre Gorius is an IP valuation expert. He is chair of the Licensing Executive Society International. With a very interesting background, he has 2 PhDs from science, technology, engineering, and coming from the manufacturing background, going into the core of the manufacturing, which is IP. I think there are a lot of things that we can learn from Dr. Andre Gorius. Time is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm waiting for the first slide to arrive. Oh. Okay, I skipped the first 2 slides just because, for the sake of time and because Michael explains several of these things. Michael basically told you and showed you that we're in a world of intangibles and most of the companies have a huge part of their assets counted as intangibles. 80, 90%, whatever you want in these high numbers. And I wanted to show this slide in where you can see 2 things. The left-hand side is the statistics above the ratio between the total value, the value of the patents, to make it simple, divided by the total value of companies. You see the statistics here. On the right-hand side, you have the same type of diagram for, let's say basically it's trademarks. So what you can see here is that the range of just the sum of these 2 intellectual property assets can be up to 40 to 45%, which is basically counting for at least 1/3 or 50% of the intangible value of companies. Well, that's the reason why we're here discussing about IP. It's such a big intangible asset that we can rely on it to finance companies. So what about reality? These are statistics, but what about of course, there are some interesting cases which are not on these statistics. This is one of them. You might have heard of it. Before it gets into insolvency, Nortel's book value was around 1 billion. 1 billion for the total value of the company as it was seen by the market at that time. Nortel's patent portfolio, when they were able later on to sell it after the bankruptcy, was 4.5 billion. So here the statistics doesn't apply. The total IP value of that company was above 4 to 5 billion compared to 1 billion total company book value. Well, if at that time, my question is simply, if at that time this value had been known and advertised, well, I would guess the outcome could have been different. So we're in a world where valuing the right IP and moreover passing the right messages is very important. It's not a question of value, it's not a question of valuation, it's a question of being able to pass messages. And that is when my first comment is that the ecosystem is going to be viable or is viable if and only if we are able to communicate between lenders, companies, IP valuers, accountants, and so on and so on. So there are several success stories. I'm not going to go into any of these, but there are many success stories around the world which shows that the right approach can lead to the right financing and to the right way of assessing the needs of companies. There is a certain, of course, pros and cons for each of these different strategies to finance companies. On the pro side, well, Michael explained you that access to capital is clear, is important, and many businesses do not have access to capital. Flexibility, meaning that this type of lending or financing can be used for various purposes like R&D, expansion, even building working capital and so on. It is generally non-dilutive. IP assets value, and that's very interesting to know, can increase over time. Meaning that when we do an IP valuation, we generally take into account at a high level the risk, meaning that the higher the risk and the lower the value of the asset, and that is very, very sensitive to that risk. Well, generally when things are going well and when the companies perform as they think they perform, the value of the IP assets can grow very fast. I even own a startup which we valued, I'm not going to give the numbers, but let's say we valued the IP at 100 at the start of the company when it really went to the market, and today it's probably 10 times more, the same IP, which is generally not true for a more tangible asset. And of course, I will show you just in a few seconds that IP-rich companies, and whatever that means is, I will tell you a little bit later, can have a much lower default risk, and I'll come back to that. Of course, on the con side, valuation, well, let's not fool ourselves. IP valuation is an opinion. It's not a number. When I give you, none of us, I think, can predict the future as accurately as a few decimals. So we just give numbers, which are in a range, and so it's complex and generally it's subjective. It's not an issue; it's a fact. We just have to be aware of it and use it wisely. It's true that it can be costly. There are generally limited lender options. The big companies who have access to a lot of money don't need to use their IP portfolio to access to money. And there is, of course, the risk of losing completely IP. I will just explain in a few seconds some ways of mitigating that very big risk, in fact, losing the whole thing. This is a work in progress, but what we did with some of my colleagues the last few months is to look at the default of all companies listed in, I think it's Moody's, 65,000 companies we analyzed over the period 2007 to 2022. And of course, what's remarkable in that period is that there were two interesting events. In 2019, we had COVID, and 2008 we had the crisis of the subprime. So the green curve there is just a log size. On the right-hand side, you have companies which are sized around, let's say, $1 billion. On the very left-hand side, you would company around the $1 million size. And the green triangles there list all the defaults as a function of size. So what you can see is that, of course, smaller companies have a high risk of default, and bigger companies have a low or sometimes zero risk of default. That's an interesting feature. If you look at the statistics, 65,000 companies analyzed, 1,500 defaults, so that's something like a few percent, 2%. We added to that a criterion in which we built on purpose, which is not to select the companies, it's really to build a criterion based on their IP richness. This criterion contains, as one of the inputs, the value of the patent portfolio as seen as at the time of default. So what you can see, there is little red dots there. are all the companies which were IP-rich among these 1,500 and which defaulted. The number is close to 30, meaning that, seen from the lender, I would, if I was a lender, look at these little red dots there, I mean, using this IP-rich criterion, basically look at IP-rich companies and start to discuss with them for lending. Unfortunately, for the other ones, I would not discuss too much with them. Even seen from the borrowers, what I would do is to build an IP strategy in order to enter that club of IP-rich companies. So that's the message. The message is really that IP-rich companies, if they are well chosen, are some kind of a safe haven for lenders. And please remind that that's an important message, and that's the one we work on. And when I advise companies, either they're in the red spots, or we help them to go into that club. What about the value drivers of the IP due diligence? I'm not going to enter very much into detail here, but on the contrary of what people generally think, when I talk with people who don't really know what IP valuation is, they say, well, the first thing that you look at, and maybe the only thing you look at, is the legal status of the IP. No, that's not at all true. We have to look at all possible dimensions, and here they're classified: legal, technical, market and business. Who can talk about any value if you don't know what's going on in the market compared with that very asset? You have the owner itself, of course, that's again who is really the owner, and of course industrial and geographical footprint. The message here is that to understand the full scope of IP that can contribute that has some value, you need to look at all the dimensions. It's not a matter of accounting, of legal, of IP specialists and so on. I consider myself most generally as a conductor. I'm a specialist of maybe one of the instruments, but I'm sure I can talk to all of the instrument players, understand them, and and use their knowledge to build the valuation. I'm going to skip this thing, but basically the value of an IP asset is essentially depending on many things, and I just commented on that, right? So the last point I wanted to discuss about, and I'll be done in 2 minutes, is that there is no way of assessing the value of any intangible asset if you don't do a thorough risk analysis. You can read what's written down here. My full message here is by the way, I am an investor in companies, in startups and so on. I generally don't look too much at the numbers first. I look at the way they arrive to these numbers. So when you tell me the IP value of a company is 10 million, whatever, I will ask you first, how did you arrive to that? Did you analyze everything I said before? And did you analyze all the possible risks which will, let's say, destroy the value of this asset? That's the end message, saying that let's not forget that one, IP-rich companies can either they are IP-rich or we can help them to be IP-rich, to become IP-rich. Then we do valuation, that's more mechanical stuff, and we take into account all the possible dimensions and not only the legal part. And we do thorough risk analysis before concluding on any value and proposing to a lender to invest in the companies. That's it.
Thank you, Andre. A very interesting conclusion from Andre, having IP would significantly lower your default rates. And also a number of technical methodology shared by Andre, something that we can learn, especially for IP professionals in Indonesia, which we are still need to develop more further into the methodology. Now, after the first two speakers with very, very deep experience and specialization in IP, our next speakers representing the IVSC, International Valuation Standard Committee. I would like to invite Sri Widya Gopal, who is the chair of Business Valuation Board of IVSC. She's also the managing director of Southeast Asia valuation from Kroll, and she has more than 30 years experience as a valuation professionals. Srividya, the floor is yours.
Hello. Thank you so much, Patriano. Hello to all my friends. It's lovely to be back in Jakarta after a bit of a gap, and lovely to reconnect with my old friends in MAPPI. Really nice to see you all again. I have been coming to Indonesia since 2012, and I must congratulate you all because there has been a significant transformation in the economy. It's not been that long, it's just been 12, 13 years, but you have really transformed from a very tangible-based economy to a very intangible-based economy today. And so much adoption of technology and so much growth coming in from technology. So hearty congratulations. So this topic is a very relevant topic, I think, for Indonesia today. Like Patriano said, I am the incoming chair of the Business Valuation Board of the International Valuation Standards Council, but I've been serving on the board for the last couple of years. So intangible valuation and IP valuation is a key priority for us, has always been a priority and will always be a priority. So I'm very happy to be speaking about this. So I do have a few examples. My colleagues, Michael and Andrea, did a great job about talking about various aspects. So I think some of it will be repetitive. I'll try to skip it. I do have a few examples which I will possibly cover. And of course, I need to say that these are not my IPs. These are all IPs from the public domain. So let's use them accordingly. In terms of just illustrations to understand how IP financing has happened over the years. So I'll just quickly cover the intangibles and intellectual property as an asset class. And secondly, on the IP financing and valuation, certain examples from the global and Asian context. And briefly touch on key consideration for IP financing for growth stage businesses, which is, I think, primarily what we are looking at from Southeast Asia perspective. So in terms of the categories, I think there are broadly, you have the intangibles, there are the intellectual property, which I think is the topic of today, and then there is something called goodwill. These are three distinct but highly related asset classes, I must say. So an intangible asset is something that we cover quite a bit in accounting standards, also in valuation. And it is IP is a part of IA, and IA is the broader spectrum. And there are some IAs which are not IPs, which may still have a value. These are the customer contracts, customer relationships, supply chain assets, franchisee networks, and so forth. And when we say intellectual property, typically these are very country specific, and these are defined by specific regulators, like the IP office of each country, in terms of what these asset classes are and what they typically mean. And it is generally understood that when you say an IP, there is a lot more protection and security and a legal angle to these compared to a typical IA. And then the examples are patented, unpatented technology, trademarks, copyrights, designs, and so forth. There is also a category called goodwill. In fact, somebody asked me over lunch about valuation of goodwill. Clearly, goodwill is somewhere there. And is it an intangible asset? Yes, broadly it is, but technically may not be. Includes value attributed to a going concern, assembled workforce, human capital, undocumented knowledge. So it's a fairly comprehensive list of assets, which is very difficult to actually segregate into different buckets. But it does contribute a significant proportion of the value of a company minus the value of tangible assets. So just to keep in mind. So in terms of IP financing and IP valuation, IP financing is something we keep talking about in the last few years, but it is something that has existed for a much longer period than we realize that it has been around. And IP financing is not just giving your IP as a collateral for a bank loan. It is much bigger than that. And the way it has been done in the past is through financing vehicles. Securitization of IP-related cash flows has been very, very common over the years in specific sectors and specific kind of asset classes. We will just look at some examples soon. Bonds are also quite common. Even in the music industry, we had this thing called Bowie bonds, which was introduced by a singer called David Bowie, which became quite common. And it's there in other industries as well, where there are licensing fees and other kind of cash flows. Bank debt with IP as a collateral, which is something that we have seen quite a bit in the recent past and spoken about by the earlier speakers as well. Hedge funds and private equity is also, even though these are slightly different kind of investors, even they have been looking at IP as an asset class. So before going into the Asian market, just look at some global examples of how IP has been financed or used to make money or used to put in capital over the last couple of decades. There are several examples. I don't want to get into each one of them, but if you can broadly see, there are these big brands. The brands have used the brand as an asset to actually get finance. And then there are a lot of securitization deals that have happened with some of the licensing that comes from content companies and music companies. This is another asset category that we've seen. So it is the brands, it is the copyrights, and it is the franchisee assets which have been a subject or an asset class that have been used for IP financing over the last many years. And there is one case study which is a global brand, but they did the financing in the Asian market in Japan. This is none other than Walt Disney. Walt Disney raised around US $725 million in the Japanese market through issuance of bonds against future earnings of Tokyo-based Disneyland. So they managed to actually get the money upfront, and they could actually service the bonds through their licensing or royalty income that was coming from the Tokyo Disney over the next few years. And because the brand is so strong, they managed to get a very advantageous deal, wherein any shortfall was actually not being borne by them, but by the investors. There is a case study. This is a Singapore case study. This was a few years back when a leading footwear distributor based in Asia, so they bought a bankrupt Swiss footwear business, a leading business, but the company went under bankruptcy, and then the Singapore company managed to buy. And through that, they managed to acquire a series of very specialized footwear patents. The acquisition enabled them to transition from an upstream to a distributor across a variety of supply chain network. So they managed to use the patents to launch new footwear products which were very unique and expand their retail footprint. So they went to one of the, they went through the Intellectual Property Office of Singapore, IPOS's IP financing scheme, which I will briefly touch upon in a bit. And there were 3 banks that were financing through this. So they went to one of the top lenders and managed to give the patents as security and raise a significant amount of money that they could reinvest into their supply chain and grow their business. The valuation was done by one of the empanel valuers based on relief from royalty method, which is one of the key income approaches for valuing these kind of assets, and corroborated by the profit split method. This was the first successful IP collateralization under the IP financing scheme, and the company was able to fund its R&D expenses in addition to any other expansion plan that they had. Very briefly on the IP financing scheme, it was launched in 2014 by IPOS in Singapore. It was a 100 million Singapore dollar scheme. And the key asset at the time was patents as collateral for bank loans. There were 3 banks which were tied up for the funding. There were initially 3 valuers that were tied up for the funding, empaneled, and then later the list was expanded. And then government was subsidizing, or rather underwriting, a significant part of the risk associated with the funding by the banks. There was a very similar scheme that was running in Malaysia. I met several colleagues from Malaysia today. I'm sure they are well aware of this and possibly did some valuation for this as well. This was running around the same time, I think in 2014, 2015 time frame, wherein the Malaysian government decided to use IP financing to support many of its small and medium enterprises. And it was again underwritten by Malaysian Debt Ventures, MDV, not MDB. And they were supporting with the financing of the intellectual property targeted at SMEs. There are many other such developments. One is, of course, the intangible disclosure framework, which possibly Andre will speak about later. It is a Singapore initiative. It's available on the IPOS website, and I would urge you to take a look at it if you haven't. And then there are others around ASEAN and other parts of the world around IP-backed financing. Michael spoke about some of them. And globally, there are many deals. Again, Michael touched on NatWest, HSBC. There's also BDC in Canada, which does these kind of transactions. I don't want to get much into the key consideration for IP financing. It's something that my colleagues already touched upon, both Michael and Andre. But just to mention that one of the key considerations, or rather the challenge, is that valuation is always as on a specific date. But as an investor, as somebody who's backing a collateral and an IP, an investor has to look at something that is going to happen in the future. What is it that they can realize in the future? So that is one of the key challenges, and hence the risk has to be assessed properly, and awareness has to be created among investors to understand this asset class, I think, which is a critical challenge that we are facing and working around. So let me stop there and pass it back to Patriano. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Srividya. Although coming from valuation standard background, I think we have a lot of key learning points in terms of how monetizing the IP. And one of the things that we can learn is about how the structured finance actually give a way for us to extract financing from this. Thank you very much, Srividya. Once we learn from the global perspective, from WIPO as well as from Licensing Executive Society as well from the IVSC. Our next speaker is coming from Indonesian government experience. Please welcome Pak Andriansah. Dr. Andriansah, he is the Executive Secretary of Directorate General of Intellectual Property at the Ministry of Law of the Republic of Indonesia. He has a formal academic degree in the architectural engineering, law and economic, and also a doctorate from University of Pajajaran. Actively involved in the international IP negotiations and cooperation across bilateral, regional, and multilateral platforms. Dr. Andriansah, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. My voice is clear. I hope you can hear my voice clear right now. Thank you very much, Pak Triyono, for giving me the chance to deliver this presentation for this session. Okay. At this session, I would like to talk about the course regarding the matters where IP or intellectual property is possible to become collateral. We know that IP is something very valuable for the economy. They can be the asset. You can see here at this moment, I would like to introduce first, I'm Andriansah. As Pak Triyono has introduced, I'm joined to the IP office of Indonesia. I was an architect, so I want the players for us architects, the creators, and then I feel the IP is very important. See that so many creation by the IP. Usually we think that IP is about the product, and after I think, or based on my experience, IP is about something intangible. It's very important to produce the product. This is the key that if we talk about the IP, it means we talk about something intangible, and of course there is the investment value there, not the cost. Okay, this is about the list of content, and I will talk about from the IP and what the IPR is, and then after that we can see that what the IP ecosystem, one part and the key of our system to work with the IP evaluation here. And the last, of course, there is also the challenge and the solution in Indonesia, for example, how we implement IP as an asset, as a capital, and can be the collateral. This is something homework, but actually it's already, it's already practiced in every time what we have faced in our life daily. Okay, the first I think I will introduce first regarding what is IP and IPR. Usually people say IP, IPR, but if we talk about the IP, I should say that this is something, the object. Object, it means the creation. The creation can be artworks, can be the literary works, can be a design, technology, and all etc. that result from our capacity, intellectual capacity as a humankind. So this is the key that after we have the creation, of course, there is a moral right. Who is the designers? Who's the authors? This is something should be recognized. And then after that, we think about the value of the economic. We can commercialize that. We can use that to have the benefit advantages in relation to the economy. We can sell, we can make the product using our IP, and it's become a product, and then we can sell to others, and we can license to others to have a cooperation with us, and then we have together got the benefit advantages of economic and become the income or incentive from that commercialization. Okay, this is the first. Because of that, and then because there is a moral right and this is a protection right, economic right, so the government then or the state then they have to have a protective effort. It is why and then the country states they made the rules, regulation, the laws regarding the IP, and that is very important, and we have to obey that regulation, and then we have together like a contract, together believe that we should do this regulation, these laws for the IP. Basically, the IPR is the form of the protection of the IP. The IPR itself, if in my mind, I will divide it into two kind of groups based on the ownership. The first is about we call the personal IP. Personal IP is like a copyright, it's like the industrial property, like a patent, trademark, industrial design, etc. And then also the communal IP, something that owned by the community. We call that the communal IP. It can be traditional knowledge, genetic resources, and then traditional cultural expression. And also it can be right now for the branding of this, usually we use the geographical indication. Okay, this is the key, I think. Basically, IP protection is one part of the cycle of what we call the IP ecosystem, that consisting three elements: creation, protection, and utilization. And then can be stimulate, inclusive, and sustainable of economic growth. This is the three of elements should be worked together and make a cycle for sustainability. And the protection element has a function. I think I always analogize that the protection of IP is something that a lubricant oil of the engine in a car, you see that? Give the smoothness and the sustainability of the IP ecosystem. It can work time to time, and it will be increased if we move the IP cycle or ecosystem time to time better and better. It's like a car. We need the oil, lubricant oil, and we have to change maybe every 10,000 kilometers. We have to change the lubricant oil. It means to make our creativity always like a cycle. Always go up, and we can sustain our business by using the IP. It is why for me, if we talk IP, it means it's investment. The investment means can, of course, support the growth of economy. It is a sample from the IP5 office, the biggest IP office, like US, Japan, European countries, Korea, and China. They all have, for example, the patent registration for domestically is dominant more than the from the abroad. I mean that always more than 50. For example, we can see in China, US, they have more the patent registration comes from, more than 50% comes from their domestic. And the effect this situation, if we can relate it, have a connection with that. So this situation then can be support the GDP. GDP, for example, can contribute the IP industries. The IP industries will contribute the GDP. For example, at least more than 30%, like the US, 38%, more than 38%. AU can be 45%. But if we give a sample in Indonesia right now, into 2022, it's around only 7%. So I think this is still far from Indonesia. We still have a homework to work with IP better, more and more, and using like IP tools as the engine growth our economic. This is the key that we have to do with the IP ecosystem. Okay, if talk about the IP ecosystem, of course, it will determine the level of IP system development. Why? Here, the level of IP system development can be divided into 5 levels. Starting from the first level is IP introduction, and the second level is IP registration, the third is IP management, and the fourth is IP as a value, and the last is the micro impact of the IP, where the IP as the economic access. If talking about the IP financing, of course, so we will talk in the 4 level, and of course the value can be asset and capital. And then this is the strategy. Okay, we can see the strategy can be without strategy is very risk. And we hope we can do defensive, then cost control, a profit center integrated. You can see the slide. And the visionary is the highest, where the strategy will be integration of the IP strategy to shape the future of IP. So the legal aspect and the economic aspect will be together to the strategy of our business, and it contribute to our business success. And then IP as asset and the capital. Okay, we can see here, we talk here that IP can be the asset and capital, because why? Because IP have the economic value, if there is an asset, have the increase our brand value, and etc. We can see the slide. And then the IP right also has a capital. The first, it is the intangible asset. This is key. Okay, this is what we have is our paradigm regarding the IP. IP is similar to, I always say to my stakeholder, the user, that IP is as investment. It is same like the land certification. The difference is, if you talk about the IP, tangible, and the transaction, I think more than the land, the right of the land, we can transaction not just nationally, but internationally. So we have to think that IP is investment. And also we think that IP is investment, not the cost. Why? Because IP, the value of the IP, the IPR, the certificate of the IP is rise time to time. Don't forget, if we have a trademark, maybe right now we registered the trademark with only 1 million. But maybe after 2-3 years, we will not sell our certificate in 1 million. It can be 10 million, 1 billion, 1 trillion. It depends on we use the IP. Okay? And then IP as a collateral. It is the same like if we do the fiduciary guarantee. But the difference is if we use fiduciary usually motorbike or something. But now we can use the IP. The difference is it's only in the form of intangible. IP is intangible, but the characteristic is the same, similar to the tangible one. Okay. The method, I think there will be, okay. And the method, right now there is a classical, maybe from the appraisal will introduce more. There is a classical, like a market approach, income approach, cost approach. But the non-traditional, for example, we can use the Monte Carlo method. And this is the example table that this one example, the valuation using the Monte Carlo method. Basically, advantages of the Monte Carlo method is suitable for uncertain and intangible assets. Provides a picture of the risk and the uncertainty more realistic than single point estimates. So I think this is something that maybe the alternative we can use for the IP, because IP is something not stable if we compare to something tangible. This is what we call the IP financing scam. We can use IP as a collateral here. This is the example, maybe from the speaker from the Korea will explain more about this. But from this, I can see that the IP financing scam has already been implemented in Korea and in the late of 2018, where Korea was starting to implement IP financing and they call IP-based lending that has been promoted by KIPO and the Financial Services Commission, OJK in Indonesia. So KIPO approved an assessment for IP-based lending with loans up to 60% of IP value. This is in Singapore. We can see. We can have a sample here. The Masai company, Barefoot company, they use the loans backed by the DBS Bank under the IP financing scheme. And they use these loans with 50% for R&D, 25% for IP protection, 15% for building the trademark, and 10% for IP registration. These are two of the examples that countries already implement IP finance scheme. Okay, and in Indonesia we have the regulation. But now, as we know that we have the government regulation number 24/2022, and this regulation is especially provided financing for creative economy actors, which involve Ministry of Law, Ministry of Creative Economy, financial institution, IP validators, Financial Services Commission, or OJK. And the last here, we can see that although we have already the regulation in Indonesia, but still the challenges here. And the solution maybe we can propose here. We have the first about the challenge here. You can see that must be, we have faced this at this time, namely with the building trust of financial institution, providing IP validators, and establishing supporting institutions such as guarantor or insurance for IP. For this situation, of course, we can propose regarding the solution that should be taken by the government, namely with the strengthening regulation and policies, standardization of IP valuation, education socialization to bank and business sectors, promotion of secondary market for IP, collaboration among governments, financial institutions, and creative economy. I think that's all my presentation, Pak Triyono. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Dr. Adriansyah, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. So we have learned about the Indonesian experience and, of course, initiative from the government, all the challenges that we face in trying to have an introduction and probably a growth in the IP financing in this market. Now, having learned about the Indonesian situation, I think next two speakers will bring us into successful experience in the Asian countries, China and Korea. Please welcome Sin Ming Ma from Beijing Zhongxinhao Asset Appraisal Company Limited. Sin Ming is a leading expert in the intellectual property and data asset utilization valuation in China. He has extensive experience in IP finance, securitization, and innovation-driven asset management. Practically, he has experienced over 90 IP securitization projects, and he has led more than 60 national and local research initiatives in IP. Sin Ming, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Ma Xinming. It's my great honor to come to Jakarta, attend the IIVC. I came from Zhongjinhao Appraisal in Beijing, China. My theme is the Chinese practice of IP financing, and I will focus on the development of China's IP pledge financing, risk control measure, IP securitization, valuation standard for IP financing, and the valuation key focus area and challenge in IP financing. First of all, I want to show you the development of IP financing in China. As can be seen from the chart, China's IP pledge financing has developed rapidly in recent years. In 2024, the amount of IP pledge financing has exceeded RMB 1.2 trillion yuan, among which patent and trademark pledge financing are the most important, while copyright pledge financing and other only account for a small part. Of particularly interest in Chinese special emphasis on IP pledge includes loan, which specially refers to IP pledge financing with an amount of less than RMB 10 million. Benefit 26,000 MSMEs in 2023 and 34,000 MSMEs in 2024. At the same time, in add to patent, trademark, copyrights, and other type of IP, such as layout design of integrated circuits, new plant varieties, geographic indications, and even data access have carried out IP pledge financing attempts. In terms of the risk control of IP financing, we can describe it from four perspectives: whitelist mechanism, collateral screening, risk sharing, and long-term operation and disposal. In terms of enterprise screening, the IP department, financial department, and other departments has established a whitelist push mechanism to regularly update, push, and monitor the development of enterprise IP. In terms of collateral screening, we strive to identify core patterns of enterprise and maintain their stability by means of combined packaging, status monitoring, and rolling updates. In addition, many IP pledge financing projects are jointly established by the Government Risk Compensation Fund pool. Financial institutions, guarantee or insurance institutions, IP service institutions, and other risk-sharing mechanisms, and all parties join bear the IP pledge financing risk. On the most critical issue of IP disposal, we should realize that the difficulty of IP disposal is a long-term problem. Actively try to transform short-term disposal into long-term operation and takeaways such as sales leaseback licensing and debt-to-equity swap to buffer the difficulty of disposal. In addition to IP pledge financing, other models of IP financial innovation are also being actively explored. One of the outstanding examples is IP securitization. In China, the main mode of IP securitization are as follows. The creditor rights or usufruct relationship of IP is established between several IP-intensive technical enterprises with IP rights and the originator, and then the originator packages the creditor's rights or usufruct of IP rights to the special purpose organization set up by the security company, reflect as IP asset-backed special plan, and certain guarantee measure and credit enhancement measure are added at the same time. On this basis, security is issued in the security market. Compared with IP pledge financing, IP securitization is a very complex way, but it has many benefits, such as lower risk. By the end of 2024, more than 200 IP securitization projects have been issued, with an insurance scale of more than RMB 40 billion yuan, providing financing for nearly 3,000 enterprises in total. The type of IP covered by this model include patent, trademarks, computer software copyrights, other works copyrights, data attacks, and so on. From the core point of IP financing, IP asset appraisal, China's asset appraisal industry has been consistently innovation IP appraisal work. In addition to the General Valuation Standard, China Appraisal Society has issued Intangible Asset Valuation Practice Standard, IP Valuation Practice Standard, and Valuation Guidance Note of patents, copyrights, trademarks, intangible assets of cultural enterprise, support intangible assets, and data assets, especially for IP assets, providing a standard basis for the valuation of assets. However, there are still many challenges in asset appraisal in IP finance, which are mainly reflected in the following aspects. First, the verification of the legal status of IP, including the ownership status and the innovation attribute of IP, is beyond the professional ability of asset appraiser in most cases and need to be complete with the help of external force. Second, in the valuation of IP financing, the income approach is mainly adopted. So the verification of IP and corresponding products and their income become the focus, which is the key to more accurate valuation of IP value. Third, the process of income statement is necessary to distinguish between the IP valuation object and the income of intangible assets other than the valuation object. So the packaging combination is a direct way to solve these difficulties. The fourth, the value tracking of IP collaterals, including how technique updates and change brought by the new IP affect the value of collateral, or how to make measure to make up for the depreciation of the value of collateral. Based on this key point and challenges, we need to pay attention to the value of IP financing, and we are also exploring the use of big data means and more intelligent way to solve the above problems. These are all my remarks. Thank you for your interest in IP finance in China. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma Xingming. Thank you. Thank you so much. So again, we see another successful example of IP financing in China, where we see a lot of securitization in place, more than 200 transactions. Hopefully, we can learn and probably practice some of those. Our next speaker would be Sung Tae-ha from Korea. He's going to share with us the successful experience of IP valuation and financing from Korea. Please welcome me with Sung Tae-ha. He's the director in IP Valuation and Management Center for Korea Invention Promotion Association, or KIPA. He's a seasoned intellectual property right professional, over 25 years of experience in IP valuation, policy, and administration. Right now, he's director of IP Valuation and Management Center, and also a few key positions in Korea Intellectual Property Office. I think it's quite interesting compared to experience in other countries. This is really an organization that called itself Valuation Agency since 1976. So without further ado, Sung Tae-ha, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Sung Tae-ha. I'm responsible for IP Valuation and Management Center, Korea. I came over here last night. It took about 7 hours from Seoul to Jakarta here. I met really kind of people, MAPPI people, and also I met IP valuation and financing expertise from WIPO and many other countries. I saw several times there's time limit signals, so I will make my presentation within 7 or 8 minutes, because honorable previous speakers already touched about the Korean IP practice. My presentation will be IP valuation practice and financing policy initiative in Korea, which aims to enhance the reliability and effectiveness of IP valuation and its role IP transfer activities. The key overview, I will cover the following topics. There are also 6 agendas, but I want to highlight the IP and VMC and KP IP valuation systems, which is Smart 5. If I begin my topic, I'd like to briefly introduce what is KIPA, which stands for Korean Invention Promotion Association. It is not a Korean intellectual property office. We implement government budgets, and there's a lot of people's IP valuation and financing challenges, policy initiative. There's more than 290 employees, including IP professionals, patent attorneys, doctors, and general staff. With these brief introductions, let me begin with our topic. This is a history of KIPA. Let me skip it. Previous speakers, honorable colleagues, Mr. Michael Kors, a little bit touch about our financing result. End of the August of last year, we reached 10 trillion IP financing, which is huge amount of money, I think. As you can see, middle of the slide, there's a Smart 5, which is machine valuations, IP valuation systems, online valuation systems. It has 9 relative grades from AAA to C. It is based upon the 140 million registered patents global IP major offices. Now I need to explain the IPVMC. There's 3 divisions: support, informations, and quality report management. There's 1,700 IP valuation reports generated in our IP communities. So one of we think important is we need to check whether this is reliable, has reliability or not. So valuation reports, quality control is one of our main commitments that we do. This main page of Smart 5, if you simply enter patent number, you can get some grade of, the excellency of patent. This overview of the report. You can see 9 grade from AAA to C. Based upon the Smart 5 valuation report, our guarantee fund, CODATE, provides some money for innovative small size startups company. This shows the trend of how IP guarantee fund operates during over the 10 years. There's some fluctuations, but it shows some trend. This is kind of a story how we implement IP guarantee for innovative companies based with the Smart 5 valuation report. Company B has some propulsion technologies, but almost every startup's cases, it has some difficulties in the beginning. Then they asked us get some valuations report with the Smart 5. Then with that report results, they went to the Korea Credit Guarantee Fund. They Korea Credit Guarantee Fund provided $500 million Korean currency funding with 100% guarantee. Well, I think this is the end of my presentations. Simply overview of IP valuations and financing practice in Korea. I really hope that we have more opportunity to work together with other foreign IP offices. Thank you.
Thank you, Sung Tae Ha. I think that would be the end of all the speakers. We're coming now to the panel discussion. We have approximately 1 hour, ample of time. All the 7 panelists will be coming with me here on this podium and take questions as well from us as well as from the audience. Let me invite my first panelist, Andre To, to the Andre is a partner with more than 25 years of experience in Ernst & Young, strategy and transaction in Singapore. He is the Asia Pacific leader of valuation, modeling, and economics advisory. In his daily work, he assists clients in valuations, business sustainability, and decision modeling. The purpose is to address clients' capital agenda from raising and investing, optimizing, and preserving capital. So he's our first panelist, but join me, the rest of the panelists, please come to the podium. Thank you. Terima kasih. Okay, so I've been told by the organizing committee that we will have about 40 minutes for discussion among the panelists, and then we'll have the last 20 minutes taking questions from the audience. From now, I will be addressing questions to each one of the panelists individually on their area of professional experience as well as on the presentations just shared with us today. Let me start off with Andre. Andre Toh is the IVSC Asia and EY ASEAN and APAC Valuation Modeling and Economics Leader. Hey, Andre, what do you think about the elements of successful IP financing based on your observation as well as sharing from the previous audience?
Yes, thank you, Pak Triono. And if you may realize, I did not talk and present just now. So many of the things I'm going to say, I'm going to steal from the rest of the panelists who have presented. So as I was listening, I was learning a lot from the various panelists as well as for the various organizations and countries they represent. So as I was sitting there listening, just like you, I have formed two views on what are successful elements for IP financing. One, I'm hearing from many of the speakers, and I feel the same. Legal protection, legal framework is very important as one element. We all know intangible asset is not tangible. It is not like land. You cannot see it. You cannot take a satellite photo. You cannot draw boundaries. It is intangible, cannot be physically touched. Therefore, it is given form only through a robust legal framework. So one element must be a strong legal framework to protect the intellectual property. And second, as I was listening to the success stories of China, Korea, and also the global example shared by the other panelists, I also realized that the second element is this thing about protecting in the case of a default. Many of the businesses, banks that I speak to, always raise the question of default risk if they were supposed to finance IP. So what is there to protect or minimize this default risk? And I heard so many things. You can have insurance to protect. You can have some sort of fund to protect it. You can have credit guarantors to protect it. I think many of these and a secondary market to give confidence to the valuation. So I think I would say these are the two key elements that I thought if it can be magnified either here in Indonesia and then learn from for the rest of us in Southeast Asia, it would be great.
Thank you, Andre. Let me get a follow-on question on that. If we look at the presentation of Srividya, he mentioned about the impediments of IP financing. One of which is the better information in the form of better disclosure. Can you share us what's your view and experience on this?
Thank you. So you have brought up a third element, and we realize as we talk to many businesses that because intellectual property can be defined in so many ways in different jurisdictions, that is important to have a common language. Just like today, we have chosen to use English as a common language because they are from so many nationalities. So in the same way, IP, you need to have a common language and a disclosure framework that defines what intellectual property and intangible assets are using one common definition is important. Businesses can use the same definition. Banks, financiers, and private equity can understand what you mean is an important part. So a disclosure framework that defines the different types of intangibles using a common terminology and language is important. The second part was a lot of times intangible assets, businesses do not link them back to corporate strategy. We all know today many companies have different strategy to attack the market, to protect their business, to open new products. how does your intangible asset help in your corporate strategy? So that's another part that is important for disclosure. And then finally, governance. Today, when we talk about intangible assets, one particular element that is always not spoken is, how have you managed your intangible? Do you have risk mitigation action? Do you protect it in a certain way? Do you always review for risk as well as obsolescence? That will then protect the IP. So those elements come together into what we in Singapore develop as an intangible disclosure framework. And hopefully it is out there shared to the public. Hopefully more and more people will see the benefit of it, and if we all start to use it, then it becomes widely accepted, a common language, make it comparable.
Andre. Okay, let me get back to our first speaker, Michael Kloss, on the experience on WIPO. World Intellectual Property Organization is a Switzerland-based global organization on intellectual property. What is WIPO is doing to help IP financing happening on the ground?
Thank you very much, Dion, for this question. So I think perhaps let's start with what I haven't told you about our country reports project in my presentation. So there are two aspects that I would like to mention here. I've talked about the different responses that different countries are taking to mainstreaming IP finance, and they are quite varied, as we have seen. Now, there is one common denominator, if you want. And what we have seen actually in pretty much all countries is that IP owners and businesses do not necessarily speak the same language as financial institutions. So there is the need to improve communication. So that's perhaps the first one. The second one is pilot projects. So now we have seen some success stories being presented by my fellow presenters. And I mean, it's clear that in many ways, IP finance has worked, but it all started with trying it out at the beginning. So tying that back to the question, what is WIPO doing? We are very much focusing on equipping participants in the ecosystem with the tools that they need. So on the one hand, we are very much working on guides. So perhaps some of you may have seen in December of last year, WIPO has launched a hands-on guide for IP owners on IP finance, effectively informing businesses and entrepreneurs on how to make their case for using their IP to obtain financing vis-a-vis a banker. And the reason for that is quite clear. IP owners and inventors know a lot about their intellectual property assets, their patents, perhaps their trademarks. But a banker doesn't necessarily understand that and cannot tie it to the information they would usually use for making a borrowing decision. And so we've developed an interactive toolkit that really tries to bridge this communication gap. So perhaps that's the first part of the question. The second one relates really to the piloting. So what WIPO is rolling out right now in 3 countries are actually IP finance pilot projects where we are cooperating with financial institutions, helping them to get a better understanding and to get more familiar with IP as an asset class. So where we are coming in really is by providing technical assistance in the evaluation of IP rights. So think of it as an assessment of the competitive positioning, the proper registration, any legal disputes of certain IP rights that prospective borrowers hold, and to help banks integrate this assessment into their decision making. And on top of that, we also provide some support when it comes to valuing these assets. Of course, both of these assessments are being contacted by third parties, and here WIPO is also providing some relief on the costs that would be incurred by a prospective partnering financial institution. So I think that is very much in a nutshell what we're doing, specifically aimed at mainstreaming IP financing. And if you allow me to conclude with one sentence on the question, we are also looking for partner financial institutions. So being well aware that many of you in the evaluation space are working together with financial institutions, that could be perhaps a very interesting proposal for some of them.
And what about the trends in capacity building happening around the world? Do you think they are moving in the right direction, and the speed by which they start to develop capability in this area?
So I take your question as capacity building with regards to IP valuation. Okay. Well, I think the speed of it is really determined by the demand. So realistically speaking, I think what's going on in the IP valuation space, and that's very interesting, is obviously we see the emergence of global convergence in terms of trends, at the same time acknowledging that the differences between countries. There are different ecosystems and different regulatory frameworks, so that has to be accommodated. What we have seen specifically in the ASEAN region in a project we actually launched back in 2023, which started with a survey of about 400 IP valuation professionals in, I think, 9 ASEAN member states, is that there are some ways in which the sharing of best practices and the fostering of professionalism can improve the trust and confidence in valuation. Now, what we've done is we have operationalized that, and we have come up with a design of an IP valuation training. And that is something we have also done over the course of last year. That's well continuing into this year. And perhaps one key finding that we had, I mean, talking about IP valuation principles, some of them are definitely not negotiable. I mean, there is a basis about upholding high quality standards that, cannot be compromised. On the other hand, I think what we have seen that the needs of the communities can vary considerably. We had some mixed participants throughout these trainings, ranging from business owners to IP valuation professionals that were more embedded in academic institutions and in the fields of tech transfer, for example, at innovation agencies. And we had the more accounting and financial transaction focused IP valuation professionals. And what we can say with some certainty is that definitely trainings need to be tailored according to the needs of the communities to really help them effectively deal with their day-to-day problems in IP valuation, and to uphold, of course, high quality standards and consistency.
Thank you, Mike. I think our discussion is now gearing towards the IP valuation. Most of us here are valuation professionals. Let me jump to Srividya regarding your experience with IVSC Board of Business Valuation. Is there any additional guidance from IVSC on intangible valuation that may benefit the practitioner here going into IP valuation for financing purposes?
Yeah, thank you for that. It's a great question. Like I said, IP, I will say maybe intangible asset, which is the broader group, is a key focus area for the Business Valuation Board and for IVSC in general. in addition to having sections on intangible valuation in the standards itself, there have been several perspective papers on intangible asset valuation that IVSC has published over the years. We started the initiative of what is called the Getting Tangible About Intangible Assets. It was the first paper that IVSC published in 2021, and it followed by a series of other perspective papers: brand valuation, human capital, data as an asset class, technology assets, and then there was a finalized with a capstone paper just last year. And that capstone paper, while it was just wrapping up everything we said, it also covered customer assets as a key intangible. So it's all free publication available on the IVSC website, so I will definitely ask you to take a look at it. And we are continuing to work on the intangible agenda, so there's going to be possibly more that will come up in the near future.
Thank you, Srividya. Again, this is a new area for our MAPPI members, so we need times to develop our own version of the comparables, royalty rates, adjustments, discount rates, and so on. Maybe I can direct the question to Andre Gorius. How would you suggest the Indonesian professionals here in trying to come up with all the inputs, adjustments, discount factors, and so on for locally specific? I mean, you mentioned about there is a global database or sources that your colleagues has been using in the Licensing Executive Society, and how do you think Indonesian professionals could rise up to that?
Yeah, but I don't think there's a very simple answer to that question. That's a very important question. The first thing is that IP valuation uses a set of many inputs, as you said. Let's take the example of royalty rates, for example. There are databases which will tell you what are reasonable royalty rates for given technologies, even in given geographies. I didn't find many Indonesian ones, but the way that we do that is in reality, and what I would advise our colleagues here in Indonesia is to do that on a very principled way. First of all, we all know that any IP asset is unique. That means that I would find criteria of comparability. Criteria of comparability are not generally very, very complicated to find. It's essentially discussion, and that's the word I want to let's say emphasize all along, is a discussion with the stakeholders. Whatever IP we discuss we discuss with our clients. So we sit down, a lot of time, and much time too, to discuss about what the IP really is about, defining what the IP really is about and what is going to be helpful. Okay, that gives us a list of, let's say, keywords that then you apply, then you let the machine get out 500 agreements. Among these 500 agreements, there will be maybe 10 or 15 which are really comparable, meaning that you choose the ones and so on, and at the end you end up with some statistics. This is basically the best you can do. Another thing that would be very beautiful, in fact, would be to build an own Indonesian database looking at all the license agreements that are available in the country, and then use these maybe as an addendum to these other databases, but that's the best for the time being you can do. The other question about maybe the other inputs, like, for example, discount rate, that is another story. Discount rate, let's say commonly, is used to measure the risk of not attaining the future as it is written on the paper today. There is no real science today of discount rates, but there are common sense things which say that the riskier the venture, the higher discount rate should be. So there are, I'm not going to go into the details, but there are some ways of assessing, looking at what happens on different markets, including, for example, the stock exchange here in Indonesia, and understand what are the drivers of risk. And once you know the drivers of risk, you can try to translate them in risk premiums on the discount rates, for example. But there is no other way to go there. in this type of, let's say, good benchmarking, that to accept that you will not have everything you want exactly in the country. So you have to make compromises, saying, well, I will accept maybe all the ASEAN type of statistics. And that's what I always do when I have to value any either company or an IP in one of the Asian countries today. I hope this helps.
Thank you. Maybe if I may have experience from Korea and from China as well, your experience in developing the technical inputs to the valuation, like discount factors, royalty rates, how do you, in China and Korea, starting developing this? I see in your presentation that Korea goes a long way since 1976, having an IP valuation agency. If there is something that you can share on your experience in developing the database of inputs that helps the IP valuations? Yes, please. Masing person.
Up to now, China's IP financing can only be said to be a partial success, not a complete success. After all, the volume of IP financing in China only accounts for a small part of the overall financial volume. And there are many innovators who have not enjoyed the dividends brought by IP financial innovation. In terms of the relative success of China's IP finance, at least the following three factors have played a boosting role. First, the strong support of government department, in the introduction of relative stability policy, risking compensation policy, and so on, while optimizing the IP pledge process. Second, the active participation of various institutions, including financial institutions, guarantee and insurance institutions, IP service institutions, especially IP asset appraisal institutions, has promoted the explorations of diverse modes of IP financing. Third, all parties work together to promote standardized appraisal of IP financing, form standard procedure from enterprise and IP screening, valuation, collateral registering, treating, and disposal, and other links, and make IP financing more inclusive and accessible.
Okay, thank you. And perhaps from the South Korea experience?
Thank you raising this important agenda. In our cases, as you surely know, the data issues, we spend huge amounts of money to get vitalized data for valuations. And also we try to develop some valuation guide for users, I mean bank and capital, venture capitalists. So there's many stakeholders. So we try to provide relevant guides for them, and also try to get vitalized valuation data. So our government asked us recruit relevant human resources who can handle these issues. So we get some more AI background and AI engineering background employees recently. So I'd like to highlight data issues, I mean, for valuation data issues.
Thank you. Maybe may I turn to Dr. Andriansyah on the Indonesian experience. What has been the rate of success of IP financing in Indonesia, and what government and other stakeholders can do differently to improve the development of the IP financing market in Indonesia?
Okay, thank you, Pak Suryono, for the questions.
Okay, I think for Indonesia, we know that Indonesia right now is still a very early and experimental stage. So if we say that despite effort from the government to promote this concept, success has been limited to do the several structural, legal and market-related challenges. Its current states of IV financing in Indonesia, we can say the first is limited success story. There are only a handful or notable cases where IP here, especially a trademark, okay, and has been used successfully as a collateral. Most financial institutions remain cautious. This is the first current state, and the second one is regulatory framework. Although we already have the government regulation 24 year 2022, this is a positive step, yes, but its implementation is still unclear, especially regarding how to value IP and also to enforce the collateral rights if there is any problem. And the third is allow financial literacy about the IP, okay? Many businesses, especially like MSMEs, are unaware the potential value of their IP asset and how to manage and to protect them. It is the key as well in the business, how the actors of the business still don't know how to use the IP itself. The bank reluctant, okay, the bank generally consider that IP intangible, volatile, and hard to liquidate, making it a high-risk asset class. That's all the state, I think, the current state of IP financing in Indonesia. Therefore, and then the second one is what government and stakeholders can do differently here. The first is we have to strengthen the legal and valuation framework. That's the first. And the second one, we have to build institutional confidence, of course, here, because here we can say that we can do, for example, the government-backed guarantees, for example, over partial credit guarantees through the institution like Jamkrindo or reduce risk for a bank, for example. And we can do also like a pilot projects, partner with a state-owned bank to create model cases of IP-based lending. The third one is raise awareness and building capacity. We need the MSE education here, because the education for the MSE regarding this IP and how to use IP and how to value the IP is very important for their commercializing of the IP. The second one is bank training is also very important because you see that the bank is the key when we have to propose. We want to propose our a loan, so the bank will decide yes or no. It depends on their trust to us, the trust to the value of the IP. The fourth is the develop of the dedicated IP financing ecosystem. We do with the IP exchanges or marketplaces, and also the cross-sector collaborations. And the last one is incentive adoption, where tax benefit, for example, over the tax deductions, for example, or incentive for the companies that register and commercialize IP. And the last one, recognition. The programs highlight the successful IP-based financing cases to build momentum and trust. I think that's. Thank you, Patrio.
Dr. Andriansa, may I have a follow-on question regarding what was generally the reactions of banks and financial institutions when they are giving a proposal, financing proposal based on IP like this? What is the typical reaction from them?
Okay, briefly I can say the typical perspective of them, the financial institution, the first IP is intangible. It's the first. Difficult to value. Okay. Lack of secondary market or liquidation path, that's the second. High risk and low familiarity, regulatory uncertainty, usually. Preference for tangible collateral, positive signal, but very limited, I think, from the financial institution. Particularly, government-backed banks and venture capital firms are beginning to explore pilot program, collaborate with IP valuation firm, and the last is engage with in blended financing models where IP is a part of a broader financing package. Yeah.
Thank you, Pak. So it's difficult to value, limited secondary markets,
Yeah.
not easy to understand, and probably difficulty to extract if in the event of default. The speakers mentioned about securitization as one of the way to raise financing based on this, and the legal expert that we speak generally find it difficult in Indonesia to perform a standard format of securitization. Probably, let me turn to Andre here. I mean, a lot of Indonesians, when they want to do securitization, they go to Singapore. Singapore legal framework seems to be more friendly. A lot of securitization is done in Singapore. But also, can you comment to us the Singapore experience, especially from financial sector or banking and finance, in terms of the securitization, as well as whether the private sector would jump into IP financing as a first option in Singapore experience?
There are some Singaporeans in this hall, so what I'm going to say next, please don't be angry. I think every country have different challenges. You hear the Singaporeans laugh about ourselves. We have so many rules. We are very law-abiding. We follow so many rules until we have lost all our entrepreneurs. Today I've heard Indonesia, you have 300 million creative people ready to take the creative and entrepreneurial route. Actually, in my mind, as I'm listening to China's success story on securitization, and we have to admit they are by far the most successful. And I realize, while Singapore may have very strong legal framework, everyone is too tajalan because they are afraid of too many rules and very uncertain of the risk. I think that one lesson for me to learn is that we should let the creativity and the innovation of the people be expanded. Therefore, the risk-taking element to increase. I think that's the one missing element that I am seeing missing in Singapore. I hope that we will learn more and more. And I also must add that what Indonesia is doing, because you are the single largest market in ASEAN. So your success here will be a very big motivation for the whole of ASEAN. So I'm really looking forward to how all the different agencies in Indonesia push this agenda. And certainly in Singapore, we'll be watching very clearly and carefully to learn also.
Thank you so much. We still have a few minutes, but I guess probably I will turn to a common question. So a lot of the experience, the successful experience from from China and Korea is IP based on technology that you can turn in. Also from Andre, IP based on technology that you can turn into manufacturing. So the scalability would be quite easy. Indonesia is probably more potential IP from creative industry, songwriting, play, and movies. We have a very vibrant movie industry and so on. How do you think we can learn from the experience of scaling up the IP developed in the science, technology, engineering, and math going into industrialization? And while probably Indonesia is not yet there, but naturally we are very, very strong in creative, very, very strong in probably in the area of entertainment and media, if I may classify it like that. what lessons learned we can learn from the scaling up the industry, technology, and also it happens that Singapore also quite far advanced in technology industry, that we may benefit here by Dr. Andriansyah from the Ministry of Creative Economy, mostly from the a lot of creative workers. Maybe you can share with Andre.
You're going to start with the smallest country to talk about talent. I believe that this cannot be left to its own to develop. That you must have government support. You must have very clear government program to push for not just education but funding in order to get the skill. Left to its own, not that the private sector will not find a solution, but I'm afraid that when private sector find a solution, it will not be broad-based. It will be very specific. Then only certain segments of the economy will benefit. So in order to equalize, you do need strong government support in terms of education and funding to get a skill. And of course, Singapore has another solution. We import talent. So welcome to anyone who wishes to find another market to work in.
Thank you for that question. I will look at it purely from a commercial perspective, from a business perspective. I think any IP should be either able to generate cash flows in the long run or saleable to somebody. There has to be a value when you sell it at some point of time. It doesn't matter. It can be technology IPs which is improving your process, which is helping your efficiency to improve your profitability in the long run, or it can be something that you create that you can sell it to somebody over time. So I think these two are the critical criteria for any IP to have value, in addition to, of course, government support and things like that. If this criteria is not fulfilled, I don't think the IP is going to have any value, irrespective of how much push we give from government, regulator, ecosystem, legal framework. I think that is the way I see it, purely from a commercial perspective.
Thank you. I will answer on a more, of course, you can imagine, technical point of view. To me, there's no fundamental difference between the scalability or the industrialization of such a creativity asset compared to any technology asset. That means looking at the market, looking at the potential market and so on, some whatever you want in these things, and then decide at the end what is your potential market. And as you say, which generates at the end, cash is king, that's it, full stop. But the second point I wanted to mention is that the people working in technology have invented several scales to measure how far you are in the journey to the market or to the complete market. And I didn't see a lot of these in these creativity type of assets. I did some valuations in the music industry. And in fact, what we used is something very simple. I think we called it the market readiness level, as just a comparison to the technology readiness level. So my answer is, one, I don't see any fundamental difference. Two, the same rules apply, and the better you have a process, and the better you're going to be able to give a realistic value.
I think there is massive potential when looking at the creative industry. Perhaps just for your benefit, what we are also looking at right now is specifically at a study looking at IP finance in the music industry, where we will share preliminary insights in a conference that WIPO is organizing mid-May, the IP Finance Dialogue. And that's actually the second study that we are conducting in that era. The first one, which was published, I think, 2023, focused primarily on IP financing in the US movie industry. So I think there is a strong case for IP in the creative sector being perhaps a little more straightforward to understand than the more technological intricacies you would have to deal with, for example, in the patent space.
I think in IP financing, the real challenge is realization of IP value. Because this reason, there are two things we have to do. First, strengthen the protection of IP rights so that the whole society gradually pay attention to the value of IP rights. The second, to change the traditional conception of IP disposal and development more disposal methods conducive to the realization of IP value. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I keep the best for last. From South Korea, you have successfully doing it in industry as well as in creative economy. Your movie and your music has been very successful. Do you guys learn from each other in making successful IP in both area?
Well, this is kind of personal opinion. I think IP valuation very difficult because it assesses the present value with the future cash flows. I say sometimes this is area of gut decisions. No one knows what is going to happen in the future. This is the main reason why we spent a lot of resources, time to develop IP valuation model or guide. Nevertheless, from the financial perspective, to encourage small startup company, we need to assess the future value of their innovativeness. This is our commitment, what you are doing. And this conference is very, very meaningful for us because all of us trying to set up international IP valuation standard with these occasions. So this is a very meaningful experience and occasions for me and also for your perspective. Thank you.
Okay. I think we are now offering questions to the audience. Yes, we already have one. Please share your name and your organization and then name your questions.
Thank you very much. In real estate valuations, when you want to finance them, financial institutions would require professional indemnity insurance. Otherwise, they will not engage you to carry out a valuation. I'm curious whether for intellectual property valuation, will there be insurance companies that will provide indemnity insurance for valuers? In certain countries, insurance companies are shirking away from providing such coverage because they see some of these valuations as high risk. And insurance premiums are going up every year for even real estate valuations where evidence is relatively more available. From what I've heard today, we are in a region of a lot of secrecy and not so transparent information to back us up in carrying out such valuations. So I'd like to know from the panel who have been doing such work, whether such insurance coverage is available for, to my mind, a risky kind of work compared to, say, real estate valuations. Thank you.
Yeah, so if I catch the question correctly, real estate valuation compared to IP valuation is a riskier valuation. There is a lot of optionality involved. And did I say about? Yeah. Yeah. And I think for the service provider or professional appraisers, you have the professional indemnity insurance. So if you get sued by the client, you have coverage. And what is the situation in IP valuation? How would we as IP valuation professionals ensure managing our risk, and whether such a risk would have any implication to the premiums of our professional indemnity insurance? Is that probably the question? Yeah, okay. Who would like to take on this question? Us as an IP valuation professionals, given our job is riskier, what would that impact on the professional indemnity insurance for the service provider or valuation? Maybe may I ask Michael, do you have any observations on this?
I'm afraid I don't have any observations on that, but it's certainly an interesting aspect to bear in mind, definitely.
Maybe I can say what I do. I mean, let's go to reality. First of all, doing any evaluation doesn't mean anything if you don't know the purpose. So there are many possible purposes. I'm not going to list them, but the first thing to do is to agree with the client what the purpose of the valuation is going to be. And then there are several steps in which you are going to answer or not the question of the client. The client at the end is supposed to tell you, yes, I got a value. I don't know if I can trust that value. That's one story. But I get a value and I can use it for that very purpose. And the way we structure our contracts is to say, okay, now that we agree on that, whatever you do with the value in any other circumstance is none of our problem, and that's the way we are insured on delivering not a value, an opinion, but based on a specific purpose. And whatever the client does outside of this purpose is not a problem. That's the way it works with all the professionals I work with.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will put it in two different perspectives. Number one, a real estate valuer knows real estate. An intangible and business valuer knows intangible and business. So it's something that we do for a living. So clearly we understand it better. Yes, it is hard to value, but that is what we do. So for a real estate valuer, this might be something which is very intangible and difficult to value. Hard to value assets, but hard to value assets is what we do on a regular basis. So that is one aspect of it. Yes, we are covered by insurance. When we have professional indemnity insurance, it covers everything that we do. The second aspect is, of course, falling back on standards. Standards and guidelines, as long as we show that we follow standards and guidelines, intangible is intangible, but we need to make sure that we follow the right basis of value for the right purpose. We need to apply the right methodologies. More importantly, we need to take into account what is known and knowable as of the date of valuation. If something happens in the future that is not known and knowable at the date of valuation, yes, it is something that we cannot put into the valuation. So if a business collapses, say 3 years after a valuation is done, clearly, as long as we show we have applied everything that we need to apply in terms of a judgment, data, information, everything as of the valuation date, I think we are in the right side of doing the valuation appropriately. So that is the way I will put it on both sides, in terms of both protection as well as how we need to make sure that we do the right job with the right judgment.
Yes, and I like to totally agree with Srividya. Just to give you a point of reference, as a fact, I do not pay a separate insurance premium or indemnity just because I do intangible. As what Srividya has mentioned, I'm a business valuer. I think Srividya is also a business valuer. Intangible asset is a natural extension. I hope there are no insurance company here. I do not pay a separate premium. Please don't even think about it, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Andre.
Excuse me?
Yes.
Is it possible to have one more question?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Bapak Moderator. My name is Rani. I'm from DGIP. I have question for Mr. Andreto from Singapore. You state about IDS that established in Singapore, and you said that legal framework is very important to IP valuation. So, is it possible to know what kind of provision to establish IDS? Because I tried to find in Google or searching engine, cannot find. And the second question is for my Secretary Directorate General of DJKI, Pak Andriansah. Is it possible that we follow success story of Singapore to have IDS also and put legal framework also in our national priority for establishing national intellectual property strategic planning? Thank you.
So, Pak, should I answer that question first? And now I've learned my lesson never to sit right next to the moderator or in particular Patriono. All the questions are very close to him. Okay, so to your question on where to find, may I suggest you look up Singapore Intellectual Property Strategy 2030, so SIPS 2030. If you look for that, you will see there are 3 trusts that will be that is meant to be important success of the IP ecosystem in Singapore. 1 is legal, 2 is business, 3rd is jobs. Under legal, you will see all the various initiatives taken by the Singapore government to push the legal that I'm talking about. So if you look for Singapore Intellectual Property Strategy 2030, you will find many of what I've said there. But just to give you a flavor, an example, in Singapore, the legal system have set aside a Singapore IP courts. So even the judges are designated IP specialist judges. This is just one example. There are many, many different levers every country can put in place just to put this robust legal framework into action. So I hope I've responded to your question. Look under Singapore Intellectual Property Strategy 2030.
Silakan, Pak.
Thank you, Pak Triyono. This answer from my colleague, actually, from the DGIP. Burani is the head of planning in DGIP. So I try to answer her questions. Regarding of course, the success stories sometimes we can use for a country, another country, but remember, as the presentations before said that there's, I think from Michael, yeah, you said that it is no one size fit all. Yes, it means we have to see the potential, the characteristics, the structure of a country first. Maybe the methods we can use the same way, but sometimes the approach regarding the potential, the characteristic of the structure of our business system in Indonesia could be different. Or maybe in Singapore they have more, more with the service, something that more higher level of the business actors, for example. In Indonesia, we have more micro, small, medium enterprises. So maybe we have to see how we use the IP financing scheme to be implemented in Indonesia. Maybe we cannot have a similar, for example, the pilot project. If we see Singapore, you will use to the maybe more higher investments, industry to have the IP financing scheme. But in Indonesia, we can start maybe from the franchising, from the MSME, who's starting with the, like a coffee shop, they do the franchising with the trademark licensing. And then step by step, we can go up, increase our, our implementation on the IP finance scheme to more higher investment. It means the first thing, the most important for me, if you do IP financing, is the trust, building the trust. Because I see that the IP financing is not about the valuation. For example, if we talk about the painting, if I paint the painting, maybe only 100 rupees, $100 maybe. But if you see, if you want to buy the painting made by Leonardo da Vinci, for example, it can be the billion. Maybe I can make the same way with the effort, but the value will be different. Because this is the trust. The same like we can do the valuation using the auction. Sometimes we just need the trust that's made by the well-known one, and this one only the common one. So the higher value of IP, of course, will be the well-known one. But the value itself, it depends on us. I think the first thing that we have to build is the building trust. The valuation of something is something that the tools to make a bank or financial institution trust with us to have a loan from them. I think thank you.
Thank you, Pak Andriansyah. So that concludes the panelist session today. Thank you very much for your participation, and I thank you, the panel, for such an excellent panel.